Hello, everybody, to a very exciting panel as part of the Virtual Supply Chain Summit 2020. We're going to be talking about integrated business planning, and we have three great panelists with us today. On one side, we have Sheri Hinish, who is best known by her colleagues and clients who affectionately call her the supply chain queen. She is recognized as a 2020 and 2019 Supply and Demand Chain Executive Pro to Known. She is also an IBM futurist, as well as a leading advocate, strategist, and influencer that brands consistently leverage on to connect their audience with trends in supply chain, retail, manufacturing, sustainability, leading with purpose and change management in digital transformations. Sheri, thanks a lot for making the time to join us.
My pleasure.
Then we have Sebastian Peters, who joined Airbus in August 2019 and is responsible for planning, logistics, transport, and the digitization process within operations, including the SAP deployment and strategy at Airbus. As part of the industrialization strategy, Sebastian's role is to develop an integrated and digital supply chain strategy. And prior to Airbus, he was Vice President of Global Supply Chain within BSH Home Appliances, where he held global responsibility for supply chain planning and factory logistics. Sebastian, thanks a lot for joining us.
Happy to be with you.
And we have Stephan DeBarse, who is Executive Vice President of O9 Solutions, one of the top global software providers that are transforming sales, supply chain, and integrated business planning with an artificial intelligence-powered platform. Stephan built the O9 organization in Europe and was promoted to Executive Vice President to lead all go-to-market activities globally. He continues to play a strategic role in the adoption of O9 technology at some of the top Fortune 500 companies, including most recently engagements with Nestle, as well as AB InBev. Stephan, thanks a lot for joining us.
Hey, thanks Radu. Thanks for having me.
So maybe let's start with the first and maybe a little bit of an obvious question. The situation that we're in, COVID-19, is pretty much different to anything that we've all experienced in our lifetime. So I want to ask, from COVID-19 perspective, has that changed the importance of integrated business planning? I'll refer to that from now on as IBP at all. Has it made it even more important, or what's the status currently? Sheri, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. So I think we're living in the midst of social, health, and environmental crisis. And COVID has shown us that, our supply chains are very complex, and they're also interconnected. And supply chains power the world, and they can be a real lifeline in times of crisis. So the importance of maintaining operations during disruption is part of the business value in IBP. Beyond that, it really enables sense making and also mobilizing business continuity, long-term stabilization, and building resiliency, which we hear a lot about right now in a few key areas: demand shifts, being able to pulse your supply network capability using scenario planning. So you're really able to understand the impact to your customers, but then also understanding the financial implications of your decision making. So a few key questions that clients ask me, are you able to recalibrate your big bets, your growth plans, typically things that are beyond that firefighting day in the life? And IBP in its finest moments gives you that. You're able to orchestrate more calculated, holistic, effective decision making.
Mm-hmm. And Sebastian, on Airbus, right? One big, huge multinational company. And you've pretty much been tasked, right, with transforming and digitalizing the IBP within Airbus. Tell us maybe a little bit of how you're thinking about it within the context of Airbus, and how also has this COVID-19 changed, if at all, your perspective of the process.
Yeah, I think what for us was a heavy impact in terms of IBP integrated planning, was the dynamic of this crisis, especially from a short-term perspective. Because this demand shock, which was hitting our industry, we have never seen this before. And as Sheri said, it's about the ability to recalibrate quickly, short-term, your internal supply chain as well as your external supply chain. And you can imagine that this is in our industry a pretty complex ecosystem which we have to tackle. And therefore, it is getting a very prominent function, because the added value which we see if we are able to calibrate the necessary production reduction, to have visibility on the supplier side in terms of material availability, to link it with existing surfaces in our warehouses, to link it with the availability of transportation. This makes the beauty out of it, to being integrated and to create an added value in terms of feasibility. Because at the end, the question is your plan feasible to implement? And this was the main thing which we had to tackle during the last months. And their planning, it was key at Airbus, but now it's even more key, because it gives direction and it creates, like I said, feasibility view to our internal as well as external supply chain. And this, and let me add you one perspective, is not only kind of from a unit perspective or from a pure supply chain perspective, looking to the necessity to impose health and safety actions in our plants, and obviously as well as the supplier, plus confinement, which was happening in different countries in Europe, across the world. This is also another layer of complexity which we had to take into account in terms of rebalancing rates, inventory levels, and this made the whole thing pretty complex, and pretty much showed the added value if you are capable, again, to show feasibility of your plans.
And Stephan, I want to kind of build upon what Sebastian said, but also, so one is the business value, right? So I'm sure that that this is something that 09 and when you go and talk to new clients, it's something that they would typically ask you. So maybe we start first with the business value that can be unlocked if you do this right, if you do the IBP right and using a good system, and then I'll ask you the second question.
Yeah, sure, Radu. And I think maybe sort of summarizing what I'm hearing from Sheri and from Sebastian is, if you look at what happened with COVID, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty on the demand side as well as on the supply side. So on the demand side, it's overnight, right? We've seen industries that go from traditional retail to online. We've seen massive shifts in product portfolio. We have seen tremendous uncertainty in terms of what is my demand going to look like, depending on whatever factor, depending on the industry. So then on the supply side, what we've seen, and Sebastian points that out, right, is that what is actually the visibility that you have upstream in your supply chain? What is the material availability? What is the capacity? And what you see initially, China sort of got in lockdown, then Europe, then US, then Brazil, and it's sort of now China reopening again. So the moment you don't have that visibility, it becomes actually extremely difficult to sort of do planning at all. And then what we have seen is that due to that uncertainty, right, the question is, what is going to be my demand, but then what is my supply commit as well as my cost to serve? And that is where scenario planning comes into play. So if you don't have an integrated view of your supply chain, if you do not sort of have that visibility upstream, and if you're too far away from what truly drives your demand, you're sort of in trouble. And you're making decisions, right, based on sort of silos and based on a lack of complete information. So I think the value of IBP is bringing this all together, right, is having better visibility to what drives demand and getting an understanding of the true drivers of your demand, is building that visibility on the upstream supply chain side, and then the ability to run scenarios. Because to Sheri's point, right, there's a lot of things you might not be able to predict, but then it's about how agile and how resilient you are. And what we've seen, clients that are agile and have invested in a resilient supply chain are much better in terms of responding to customer needs and understanding different trade-offs based on that uncertainty that we've been talking about.
Actually, we had on one of the previous panels, we had somebody that did share from a large consumer company. They had recently rolled out an IBP system, and it has helped them a lot. But I guess to your point, the main issue is that a lot of companies still in today's world, they operate in silos, and using IBP to break down those silos is one way to actually add that and unlock that value. But I guess what I want to stay with you, Stephan, and ask, what are some of the major challenges when it comes to that? Because siloed mentality is hard to break, right? So when you go, and maybe O9 goes and wants to talk to the key stakeholder into a company, how do you convince them that, okay, this is a good idea? I mean, in theory, it makes perfect sense, right? You should not have this silo mentality, right? But I guess that in practice, the conversations are a little bit more complicated. So I guess I wanted to go a little bit further into that.
Yeah, I think the main issue is, and actually it's regardless of technology, right? It is, what is the value of IBP? And ultimately what you see is a lot of, big organizations, they have an S&OP process, which is very sort of siloed and within the four walls of an organization. That is one. The second issue is very supply chain driven. Hey, this is my demand forecast. Can the supply chain commit to that, yes or no? But I think we need to change, right, what IBP stands for. So we often say the I in IBP gets forgotten, or the S in S&OP. So it all starts with the end customer in mind, right? And then, especially for P&L owners, right, because those are the owners of the IBP process, it's about making, decisions that ultimately leads to sustainable profit for the organization. And I think with that goal in mind, we need to start sort of understanding what the issues are. So you mentioned this, CPG company. What we see at many CPG companies, first of all, right, when it comes to IBP, they do not understand sort of what is driving their gaps, or what is driving, the disruptions in their market. Why not? Because they're too far away from that. So they can't make the right corrective actions, or they're way too late of doing that. Now, the other thing is, the moment you don't understand the root cause, the corrective action that you launch might be wrong. So for instance, what we see is CPG company, there is an issue, there is a gap. How do you respond? With price or promo. But what if the issue is actually, for instance, poor distribution coverage? Then you're making, right, the wrong corrective action. And then I think Radu was very important is IBP starts with the commercial teams, right, on the gap analysis, the gap closure simulation. But then what they request from the supply chain team is a response. So there can be a commercial scenario where the demand is 120, a commercial scenario where the demand is 100, and a commercial scenario where the demand is 80 with different assumptions. What you want to get from your supply chain is the supply commit, the different trade-offs, and the cost to serve. And why is the cost to serve important? Because commercial scenarios are associated with uncertainty and risk. But the moment you ask the supply chain to do something, those costs become real. And that is ultimately what you want to promote to the IBP meeting, those scenarios, financial trade-offs, assumptions, so that commercial teams, supply chain team, and finance teams feel comfortable bringing that to the P&L owner to make an intelligent decision.
Absolutely. If I can diverge a little bit, I think that there is a human experience also, and a readiness that we often forget in IBP. So like Stephan mentioned, you hear about visibility, and we all know democratizing information, using that connection, typically across disparate data and functional silos for advanced decision-making is important. But another thing is change management and good leadership. And I think that that's what's tucked under IBP, where I have seen sustained improvements. And the reality is there are social needs that have to be met, and digital readiness is a real thing. And we have to understand this tension between traditional hierarchies and how communication happens, how decisions are made, how behaviors are incentivized, juxtaposed with platform orgs. And this is really what's happening in the future of work and digital transformation. They're flatter, they're more adaptive networks that operate differently, and they use technology as an equalizer to make sense of the changes that Stephan has described. And in my experience, both in industry, actually leading IBP transformations, I think it's a journey, and we forget that. And with M&A and natural attrition, it's not a linear experience. And it can be a jumbled mess at times, and it feels like that. And that's what life is. And breaking down those silos, I don't think that technology alone is really going to address your wicked opportunity in IBP. The magic that you're looking for, the nitty-gritty, is people, change management, leadership, and also building that adaptive culture for scale and long-term adoption.
And
can
to
only
kind of
agree from a practical insight, because you're fully right. It's mainly about change management and how to bring different functions together. And especially if it comes to the origin of IBP, which is obviously S&OP, how you can translate the sales perspective to the production or more supply perspective. And there you have completely different people around the table, and you need to orchestrate them, and you need to be able to talk sales language, translate it to production language. And this is typically what at the end brings a big success, building this bridge. And at the end, the technology is for me not that relevant so much, because it comes at the end. If I'm able to make this bridge, to have change agents which are able to combine different perspectives, then I can start to work on the processes. Because at the end, we all know that the supply chain planning process is a pretty complex thing, with complex algorithm, with complex assumptions of available production capacities, including the supplier side. This then is the process design work to do. And then when you are ready to have the right process in place, to have the functions together with same expectations on what is the outcome, what is the deliverable, very important, then you are ready to plug in the right software. But this, for me, always comes at the end of this process. And I would say, looking back to the past, that was often where some transformations failed. It was too technology driven, because at the end, the users, they like those nice tools. They directly jump to a new application, say, wow, super. Here I can see online availability, customer signals. But this is at the end of this journey, then to translate it to the right system. I think this. So I agree, Sheri. Absolutely important point. Can confirm.
And I wanted to stay with you, Sebastian, because you've done it. I mean, you've done it before. You're tasked to do it now at Airbus. Maybe I wanted to dig a little bit deeper and to get some lessons learned, and what worked, what didn't work for you. What did you what would you do again right now with Airbus? What you did maybe in BSH, or when you did it back then. And maybe you can share a little bit more details with us from your journeys and from your battle scars in implementing IBPs.
Yeah, like I said, it's first of all about the people, to bring them together, cross-functional tasks. Obviously, it needs a strong guidance from a strong supply chain function, but it has to be always clear that this is more an orchestrating function. That is not the function who takes the final decision, because you prepare, hopefully, the right decision, which then those organization who owns P&L in your company can take finally. So you have to orchestrate it. And then it's also digging a bit deeper to the needed process design here. I think what is always a bit of a challenge to tie the IBP S&OP approach to the planning machinery, because IBP is more kind of this tactical way forward. But from my perspective, you have to make always sure that you tie those decisions, those simulations, to your execution systems. Because otherwise it remains always super theoretical, that you make nice assumptions, but you really have to tie it to your operating system, to the execution. And this is pretty tough because the supply chain is complex. You have a lot of manufacturing entities which are interfering, different master data, different processes in place, and then the outside world, suppliers, how to connect them. But at the end, if you really like to have a feasible and realistic plan, you have to bring planning and execution together. This is one of the big lessons learned there. And this requires, again, I have to impose this strict process design and strict standardization. Sounds awkward, standardization, but it's needed for any kind of successful transformation on planning. Because otherwise you will be never able to tie this complex structure of data together, which is key.
And in terms of the some concrete maybe benefits, or even if you have some data, Stephan, because I'm sure that you having helped multiple clients implement such IBP systems and processes. Can you share some some wins and some some good example of benefits that they got out of it?
No, absolutely. And I think maybe first to Sebastian's point and to Sheri's point, right? I think absolutely change management, people, absolutely. Process, extremely important. However, I think what we've seen so far is that maybe, 4, 5, 6 years ago, I think many companies were constrained by technology in terms of, fast implementing and accelerating an IBP journey. And for instance, what we've seen, many companies are facing, they have different ERP systems, they have different data sources. And the first thing that they run into is master data challenges, right? So how to solve those. Then you run into challenges in terms of, how will my users adopt? Because, to Sheri's point, if, users are not adopting to whatever, you can have the best technology, but it doesn't scale. So there are a lot of different issues that I think many organizations have seen over the years in trying to implement, this process with whatever technology. But I think we are now at a moment where technology has advanced so fast that we can truly leapfrog. And we can truly leapfrog in terms of a traditional S&OP process to an integrated IBP process, connecting customers to the internal organization and the internal organization to the supplier base, to provide that visibility and then ultimately start making better decisions. Now, Radu, to your question, right, what we strongly believe is that for any company, whether it's a retailer or a manufacturer, for every sort of $1 billion in sales, we believe there is a $10 to $20 million value opportunity. But that depends on what is the starting point, and there are different what we call value drivers, right? Some companies have, for instance, an extremely poor forecast accuracy and are struggling to sort of understanding what's happening on the market, so that's an easy win. Other companies are sitting on tremendous sort of inventory, right? And the question is, right, can they operate leaner? Because what we see is because many organizations, especially organizations where there is a sort of very long tier network, is all of them are sitting on buffer stock, right? So and it keeps sort of adding up. What you actually see is that supply chains become one of the sort of polluters of Earth's resources, as well as a lot of waste in this world. And I know Sheri's very passionate about that, but that's what we are seeing here. So I think Radu, really, I think what we are seeing is organizations are not longer constrained by technology. Organizations are constrained by sort of how fast they can innovate and the speed of change and sort of adapting to that. And then I think there is, such an enormous amount of value to unlock, from top line to cost to inventory. And that's what we see, over and over again with our clients, but in general, in the world.
Mm. And I'll ask Sheri this because kind of building upon what you said and to the reality. Well, COVID kind of hit us in the face that you can have a plan, but pretty much that plan is out of the window. And IBP is all about planning, right? So but volatility is literally making plans obsolete even before it's signed off sometimes. How do you approach this challenge, Sheri? I mean, is it a question of IT? Is it a question of business process, organization, mindset? How can we do this?
I think it isn't just one thing. It's a balance of each depending on the maturity and the readiness. And that mix and composition can be different depending on the company. So real talk, implementing S&OP, IBP, I could go into a market with the same approach, the same tools, the same technology vendor, and be wildly successful, and do the same thing in another market and fail miserably. And I remember the first time I failed, my boss at the time, I took it really hard, and he said, Sheri, this is what you need to remember: purpose, people, process, performance management. That's IBP. And he used a quote, which I'm not advocating, but it stuck with me 10, 12 years later. A fool with a tool is still a fool, but faster. And if you don't dial in good business process, good collaboration, good communication, you will fare. You will get there much quicker with, implementing technology. So I don't think it's just one thing. I think it's a balance. And the mix, it really depends on your industry, your segment, the people who stand up your IBP, and also your trading partners. How mature are they? Are you really able to collaborate across your network?
I actually want to ask you a little bit further, because you got me curious on one side, but on the other side, I think it is a relevant question to our audience. Like, so why does it fail? What are some of the pointers that make such initiatives fail? And maybe we can flag them, because I guess that's something valuable to anybody listening.
Yeah, so, I have a background in organizational leadership and change management. And my point of view, which may be provocative, Stephan, I'm sorry, because I've also had this conversation at length with Igor, that you can have the shiniest tools and the best strategy in the world, okay? But without integrity and shared purpose and a culture of empathy, you're only going to get so far. And I've seen millions of dollars spent in implementations fail because leaders forget basic things. They forget to connect why. Why are we changing? They forget to talk about the WIFM. Have you heard of that expression, Radu? WIFM? What's in it for me?
Okay.
What's in it for me? And so this is old school, but it's true. And people need to know, how are they a part of something much larger than themselves? How can IBP empower them and affect them personally? So you have to walk through that day in the life process change. Change management and training are typically the first things that are cut from the SOW in IBP and digital transformation. As a consultant, I can confirm that is true from several large Fortune 500 companies. This is wrong. IBP leaders, they cannot forget the reality that these are human beings that you're asking to change. And we reject change. We like our, comfort zone and our place of stability. So any advice that I can offer is, please don't forget that you're asking human beings to do something differently, whether it benefits them or not. There's an element of change that needs to be managed, and you have to really connect purpose, people, process, and performance management. Make sure you're incentivizing the right behaviors.
Agree, Sheri, but maybe let's try me to support a bit Stephan's approach on the technology, because as I said, fully agree, change management first, process standardization, super important. And it's for me also a bit of a step-by-step approach. Purpose comes together with change management. This has to be always first. But then I would say in the year 2020, and if I compare to 15 years back when the first APS systems have been or were available, it was a painful exercise then, even if you had a nice process design, to bring it to real life in terms to the systems, to have, it was kind of famous during those times, online availability. We never had it because the system was not powerful enough, the database. And nowadays, we have cloud technology available, which is much stronger performance inside the system, and especially going to the cloud, make one weakness out of the game, which was a problematic situation if you have so much different ERP systems, different master data structure. Now with this cloud approach, this is super powerful, and you are quicker at the end to bring something to real life. And this is the beauty out of it, and there is a huge potential there. So Stephan, I hope I could support a bit your approach there.
No, but
again, I think it's at the end of the journey because it's so important. Because if you talk about forecast, you can have the best forecast engine. If you're not able to convince a sales guy, a sales responsible to take this figure, to incentivize his own people on this figure, then you will never win. Most probably you are always more right than the sales guys, but if he does not commit then where do you go with it? And therefore, it's so important to have this cross-functional approach, creating commitment, and this is key for me.
But I think
I remember. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
go
I
on.
was going to say, I remember those days. I don't want to show my age, but you're absolutely right. Technology is a huge enabler now. And just asking a simple question, you know, what's available to promise? That was like looking in a crystal ball and hoping for the best, right? So
Exactly.
I take the point. Technology is absolutely, it's an enabler right now, for
But
sure.
actually, Sheri, I completely agree with the comments that you're making. However, I think there is a difference. I think the traditional approach of, getting sort of a large army of consultants, right, and answering those questions that you're rightfully asking. But I think that question, what's in for me, can be enabled by technology. Let me give you one example, right? We're working with a manufacturer of tires, and the initial focus was on the demand planning. Now, to Sebastian's point, how do you get a salesperson adopting to any planning platform, any? He or she is like, why should I spend any time on putting in numbers to get down a forecast because I want to go sell? That's my job. So when we started the implementation, the first couple of months, we actually created a forecast that outperformed the consensus forecast, but still the sales organization didn't want to adopt. And we were like, why not? And then it became interesting. Even though sort of the system generated forecast was more accurate, they felt they lost sort of control. So then we turned it sort of around and we said, how can technology then enable the sales organization to sell more? Now, in this case, this company was selling tires to the aftermarket. Now, that is where we started thinking about external data sources. So think about the US. In Texas, you have more pickup trucks than in California, where people might drive more in a Tesla or Prius. So the moment you have that information, you can then bring that information into the platform. What you can actually start doing is, making assortment recommendations to what a particular dealership should be assorting. Now, the moment you provide that to the organization and say, hey, let me take care of forecasting, you start, talking to dealers about assortment recommendations so you can sell more. You have more or less answered the question that Sheri is asking. Salesperson, what is in for me? Well, at the same time, you have actually enabled that person to sell more. Now, this is one example, but I think that people, process, and technology need to start walking hand in hand versus I'm going to spend 9 months on my strategy, another 9 months on my process definition all the way to L8, and then I'm going to implement a platform. Oh, and by the way, by then I learned that the platform is capable of doing more. So now I need to redo sort of my process redesign. And I think, it's sort of funny, the conversation we're having here, because I think it all sort of comes together in terms of how we think about sort of doing it and then what it should be delivering.
Right, but what you're describing too is that psychological safety, that space where you are meeting the social needs of the sales representative that you're describing, because you're empowering them with technology and you're giving them significance, which is one of the social needs that must be met as human beings in digital transformation. So I would go back, is it the chicken or the egg? Well, it's both. It's both. But I think without psychological safety in digital transformation and IBP, you definitely won't get to the outcome.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that, Sheri.
I think it depends also a bit on the maturity, on your existing processes. If you go step by step or if you go iteratively, it depends a bit. But what I think where we have to be careful is also this step from SNOP to IBP, because I really don't get it, because from an SNOP approach, you had always a task to translate a unit perspective to euro. So at least as a first financial insight to come closer what officially is named as an integrated business planning approach. But I think what is really key is that we have a clear tie, what I said, from the strategic technical planning to the execution. And just to give you one example, which I observed in my last company, outside-in data, well known, and everybody would say, yes, we need this to increase forecast accuracy. But then if you look to real life, how is it able to connect point of sales data from retailer to your company? This is far away from being really implemented, because it starts with a problem that retailers are also not kind of standardized. They have different master data. They have different demand patterns. Their technology nowadays can help, because putting them together. But I think the maturity a lot of times is not there where we thought it is. So therefore I started with S&OP, because I think there are still a lot of companies struggling to have a standard capability on S&OP, especially from this outside-in perspective, which still is more kind of a dream for a lot of companies, I would say.
But I think
and confirm from your experience implementing software.
I think, Sebastian, to respond to that, right? I think it's so spot on, right? But that is where I made that comment that technology has now advanced so far, but people might not know. So to your point, many organizations struggle with that. Hey, I might get, sell out data or channel inventory data, but actually what I've created 5 more Excel spreadsheets. And then they get excited because
they're so true
to the marketing teams, right? And they get now, competitor promotion data or, weather data, whatever data. And actually what they've created is more Excel spreadsheets. So the whole problem is, they have this 20 different Excel spreadsheets to sort of manage, and it becomes, sort of out of control. And I think that is where you will see nowadays technology that is able to sort of see it as a sort of what we always call sort of a digital brain. So you need to connect the different data sources in your organization to a digital brain that is extensible. So the moment your business is changing, or the moment you get to more data, or the moment you acquire a company or launch or go into a new channel, go-to-market channel, that is where you require your software and your technology to be flexible and to enable that change. But what we've seen today in APS systems today, that is where you're stuck, because they are sort of very, rigid. And I think that is where people start losing the trust and the value in technology enabling IBP. And I think that is the change that I've seen when I actually implemented the solution and then joined the 019. But that is really what I believe we are enabling now with next generation technology.
Yeah, and you mentioned the beauty of piloting. So starting small, getting some of those small wins under your belt and actually building digital trust. I think that's also important. We're not living in the monolithic, dinosaur big implementations now that happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Now it is that iterative process that's a journey. You get the buy-in, and that's the beautiful thing too, that this truly has to be positioned as an adventure.
Oh, it is, Sheri. I completely agree with you.
And I have been quiet because it's been incredibly interesting to watch. So I haven't quite been on a panel that didn't need me, actually. So I should have just let you share from the beginning. That was very, very interesting for me. I learned a lot, and I want to kind of end on a note of, again, the people perspective, right, and the skills, and what do you need as a leader to make this happen, right? To push through such a change that an IBP process would incur. What do you think, and I'll go around to each of you, what are the key 1-2 skills or qualities that you need to be able to do that, in your views? Sheri, I'll give you the floor first.
Sure. So I don't really look for skills per se. I look for behaviors, diversity of thought, and also someone who can really embrace divergence. So having people that are comfortable challenging the status quo, that have a healthy disrespect for business as usual, and that can really be creative in scenario planning once they have the technology in their hands. And I think that there's an overarching theme that I've learned in my life, that the most complex problems in IBP are solved by learners and not necessarily knowers. So you have to have talent that are willing to learn, because this is an agile environment. Things are always changing. And having that solid tool in place can give you a new water level. So you're upskilling your weakest link, so to speak. And you have to have people in place, this is my last point, that really view technology as a companion and as a cobot. It's not viewed as a threat. And having also a high EQ. I think that that's important, because then those people are typically more collaborative and they're able to articulate their thoughts and changes that they're sensing in the environment more effectively.
Great point. Sebastian?
I confirm. Good points. I think that one of the key criteria is, at least from my perspective, social empathy, because it's so necessary that you have people who are acting from a supply chain perspective in this cross-functional view. So, and therefore it's necessary to be able to talk sales language and also to talk production language. Because at the end, you have to bring both perspectives together. And there you have to create commitment from two completely different mindsets, typically, what you found in bigger companies. And this ability to connect to them, to be able to talk their language, I would say is key. In addition to this, obviously, more practical things like strong analytical skills, having a solid understanding about technology. You would call this nowadays data analyst capability. Maybe this is needed to get also the architecture things clear. But at the end, the decisive factor is more, from my experience, is soft skill perspective, which I mentioned. This is key because at the end, to orchestrate in supply chain, you need guys who are ambassadors to be able to look for those trade-offs. And supply chain at the end is a pure trade-off where you need to combine those different perspectives and where you have to connect different perspectives. So therefore, I can only emphasize this. It's important.
Stefan?
Yeah, I think so many good things have been said. I would say what you need is for leaders to empower the organization to embrace change. I think that's extremely important. Leaders itself, I would recommend them to have courage. So sort of embracing what you're doing today is not enough. So there is a need for change. Embrace it, be open to it, and start doing it. And I would say, and conclude, maybe have fun. Right? I mean, digital transformation is a lot of fun. So,
I love that.
And how to do that, right, is to Sheri's point. You have to celebrate those quick wins, right? And make an event out of it. Take your team out, send out a video about what you did to the entire company, right? Promote the people that contribute here, but have fun, right? And I think that we are having fun here, by the way. So, Sebastian, I think, Sheri and I can definitely help you with a fantastic project here, but no, it's about fun, right? And I think that's very important.
Everyone loves a good party.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially if you never, this famous slogan, never miss a good crisis, and there always supply chain is stepping in, right? Yeah. So you love this. You need to love this. It's important.
And I think we're not going to miss crisis, whether it's COVID-19 or otherwise. In the next months, it's going to come in some other form. So I guess crisis is the new normal. Like a good friend was saying, that she's just getting used to always acting in crisis mode, because that's just what it is. So,
you know what's funny? I heard someone say, with this new normal, that it's never normal. And for supply chain people, we live in a never normal. I don't know that we ever have the same day twice, or at least I didn't in my career. So that's a new phrase we're using. Supply chainers, never normal.
And I like
normal. Agree, an awful word.
And it also kind of gets that sense of pride, because which it should be like that, because I think ultimately supply chain does make the world go around. So we need more of that as well. Super. On that note, a great panel. Really loved the interaction, energy, and sharing. Was great for me personally to learn from all three of you, and I'm sure the audience got a lot out of it. Many thanks. Stay well, stay healthy, and keep rocking.